Thanks, Anya. Thanks, Linaire, and welcome to everyone. Thanks for joining us here tonight. I know many of you will probably still be in holiday mode, but hopefully we can ease you in gently tonight back into reality and in preparation for the upcoming spring and calf season. So for those of you who don't know, my name is Michelle McGrath. I work with Animal Health Ireland. Not sure, can you see my screen there now?
It's just coming up, Michelle. It's just coming on screen. We should be seeing Dairy Women Ireland logo. I can see it, so hopefully everyone can.
Yep.
Okay. And can you see the 2 slides or 1 slide? Or
just
one?
The main slide. Yep.
Oh, okay, great.
Now we can, do you want to X out? We can see the participants on the side. So if you just want to X that out, the rectangle.
Oh, wait. I can't see that.
If you want to minimize it, if you want to minimize the thumbnail.
Okay.
It's.
Did that work?
Not for me.
No. Okay, just don't mind, don't ignore it.
Okay, sorry. I'll just try it once more. Sorry.
No, it's done. No, it's fine. It's fine. It was actually on screen. Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, great. So yeah, my name is Michelle, and I work with Animal Health Ireland. I'm a vet. I qualified a number of years ago, but I'm also from a dairy farm, and I work or help out with my family when I get a chance during the busy seasons. We are delighted tonight to be joined by 2 very I don't know how I'm at a loss for words to describe them, but I will try and give you a summary of their greatness. We have Catherine McAloon from UCD. She's a suckler farmer, or comes from a suckler farmer in Fermanagh. She qualified as a vet 12 years ago and worked in practice for a number of years before joining UCD. She is now a European specialist in bovine health management and works as a lecturer in the herd health section of UCD. She divides her time between clinical work, research and teaching, and she also dedicates a lot of time to helping Animal Health Ireland with various programs. So we're delighted to have Catherine here with us. And also we have Gillian O'Sullivan, who is equally as brilliant. She's a dairy farmer from Waterford, qualified as a veterinary surgeon 16 years ago and worked in practice for a number of years before returning to her home dairy farm. She's also completed a grad cert in dairy herd health, and writes regularly for the Farming Independent and the Farmers Weekly. Is a member of the organising committee for Positive Farmers Conference and was part of the discussion panel at the recent Newfield Ireland 2022 conference. So she's probably familiar to a lot of you on this call here tonight, and we are very delighted to have them both with us. And I just would like to say that they had no hesitation in joining tonight. They both have very young families, so I know it can be a difficult time of the day, and we really appreciate you sharing your time with us tonight. So I just want to remind you of our great steering committee in Dairy Women Ireland. We are really lucky to have such a talented bunch, which we are led and motivated by Linaire, who's on this call and who was speaking there earlier. We have Anya there who's hosting it, and as I say, it's really a team effort, and I'm delighted to be part of the committee. And it is really, Dairy Women has always been close to my heart from a personal point of view, so I'm delighted to be involved in this committee and have the opportunity to be involved in it today. Just
apologies, Michelle, you're muted. I want to remind everybody to mute Michelle? Hello, Michelle. We can't hear you. Michelle, can you unmute yourself?
Well, I suppose while Anya's sorting this out, Mary Kinston, I'll just step in here because she was just highlighting that we've got a session of breeding meetings as well in April. And that was just the last slide up. So they'll be going on, if I remember, there'll be a Zoom on the 12th of April, and then there's 4 host farms across the country. So over to you, Michelle.
Can you hear me now? And can you see my screen now?
We can see your screen. You have to screen share.
Okay. Sorry, I don't know what happened there.
I ended up muting all by accident because there was background noise. So that my apologies.
Trying to challenge me on you.
No, apologies.
I'm joking.
If you want to go
Can
into
you see
your,
my screen now?
do you want to go into your display settings so we just see your main slide?
Okay. Is that working?
Yeah.
Is that
Perfect?
okay?
Perfect. Yeah.
Okay. So as Mary mentioned, I was just highlighting the events that are coming up in April on the breeding season. There will be a Zoom call and some on-farm meetings. So you'll be reminded about these again near the time, but I probably will forget to do it later. So I said I'd do it now. So just, I suppose the objective of tonight is an introduction to calf rearing, and as there are a lot of kind of key topics around calf rearing, we mightn't get to them all tonight. So we would encourage you to try and attend these calf events, which are organised by Animal Health Ireland and Teagasc in conjunction with the local co-ops. So each of the co-ops around the country have identified farmers that are willing to host these events. And so that's how those locations are there. You don't have to register for these, you just can turn up, and we will hope, Dairy Women Ireland will hopefully have a presence at all or most of them anyway. I'll be at a lot of them, and Catherine actually will be presenting at a lot of them as well. So we would really like just encourage you to attend. They're great events, they're always very successful and educational. And I just would like to thank Gráinne Dwyer, my colleague in Animal Health Ireland. She puts a lot of work into organising these, and so they're down to a T now at this stage. Just to mention that you might have seen these advertised, and initially the events that were on Wednesday, the 11th of January, and Friday, the 13th of January, they've been swapped. So this is the correct one here. So on the 11th now it's in Carlow, and on the 13th it's in Waterford. Again, if any of the hosts, any people who are hosting these farmers are on the call, I'd like to thank you. I know it's a big ask to host to be asked to host these events, and we're really appreciative of it because they are so important at getting the key messages out there. I suppose also I'd just like to take this opportunity, if you are interested or would like kind of information at a later stage or after this call, that there are lots of invaluable resources on the Animal Health Ireland website, which farmer friendly, and worth a look, and they're very well written and educational. So just if you miss anything tonight, the resources are there. So I'm just going to give start off by giving an overview of what's involved in kind of successful rearing. As I mentioned, there are a lot of kind of key headings, and then Catherine will expand on the important kind of key messages, and then we'll get Jill to share her experience of calf rearing at a farm level and how she puts the theory into practice. As we mentioned maybe before some of you joined, we encourage participation. If you want to use the chat function, you can type in your question and we'll try and take them as we go, or even at the end might be easier. Just we're probably all a bit not as quick as we used to be before the Christmas period, so it might be easier to take them at the end. So I'll just kick off, and as I say, Catherine will go into these in detail, and then Jill will go through her experience. So I guess I was preparing these slides over the last while and trying to think about, from my own experience, or when I'm trying to kind of tell or not tell, just help someone to if they're having a problem with calves, how they should go about fixing it. So I guess the first thing is colostrum and the importance of the calf getting colostrum quickly, good quality colostrum within. So the 1, 2, 3 rule, for anyone who doesn't know it or can't remember it, is the milk from the first milking or given within 2 hours, 3 liters of milk. It's probably easier to say 3, 2, 1 actually, but 1, 2, 3 rhymes better. So it's 3 liters of the first milking within the first 2 hours. And it's important that this milk is collected hygienically, because the calf is born without any antibodies, unlike humans, and so they're dependent on this good quality colostrum to get off to a good start. But they can only absorb it within the first 24 hours, and how much they can absorb decreases rapidly after the first 2 hours. So that's why those timelines are very important. Also then moving on, the calf's born as a monogastric. It has a very simple stomach, so it can't absorb any forages or anything. So how the rumen, which is the kind of key stomach of the calf, develops is determined by how the calf is fed. So the approach to weaning is very important, because if the rumen hasn't developed properly, it will lead to a lot of problems when the calf goes out on grass, especially, or they won't grow properly. And again, Catherine will talk to this later. I've mentioned about feeding milk or milk replacer, and this will be covered in the calf events. But really, if you are feeding milk replacer, you need to look at the spec on the label. There's a huge variation between milk replacers, and depending on what ingredients are in them, it determines how much they are sold for. And you might think you're getting a great deal at a certain price, but really, if the quality of ingredients isn't up to standard, then you're losing out in the long run. I suppose I have preparation area there. It's all about being organized and making everything kind of easy to do. And if it's easy to do, it'll be done properly. Having the correct equipment. I will go through a list of kind of recommended things that are helpful at the end. I have standard operating procedures down there, which some might think is a bit excessive, but if some unforeseen thing happened and some strangers were in feeding your calves, then they need to know, or it would be great relief if they knew exactly what to get, how much powder, how much water, the exact procedure that you use when you're feeding your calves. And also, if you have any staff or new staff in, to go through these procedures with them before things get busy. And that was at our conference. Nolig was a great believer in having these conversations before people get stressed, which in the busy times, which will be something that could be done now. So following on then, can't overemphasize the importance of having clean, dry and warm environment for the calves with adequate space. The pens hopefully will have been cleaned and disinfected by now, and allowed to dry. You know, good drainage is important. I suppose there's not much you can do about the drainage now, but it might be something to think of for future if you are designing a new calf shed. The slope of the floor is quite important. Good ventilation in the shed is important to prevent pneumonia. If there isn't good ventilation, then you'll get a build-up of smells and ammonia in the air, which irritates the calf's lungs and makes them more susceptible to pneumonia. I say good ventilation, but you don't want drafts at the same time, because this will again increase the risk of pneumonia in the calves. Bedding, I suppose, you know, enough straw will cover a lot. If they have a good dry bed, that keeps them warm and allows them to nest. It's very important. If you have a cold shed, then the option of red lights is a good option, or even calf jackets, once they are breathable, can be another alternative. Group sizes are important, and not to be kind of mixing different groups. It's very stressful on the calves, so try and keep them to a limited size of calves that they're used to. Like a group of 12 or so is probably the recommended, but again, it depends on the type of calf feeder you have. And then access to clean water and concentrate. I suppose sometimes water is overlooked, and the importance of access to this water. And so this is just another thing that we try and emphasize the importance of, that each calf, like even from a few days old, should have access to clean water. It helps the rumen to develop properly. So then just quickly, some of the signs of calf health. You know, really, there's nothing is better than looking at the calves as often as you can. If you have a calf feeder, then sometimes the calves mightn't be seen, but hopefully you'll see that they're not drinking on the computer. But even if you're not, if you do have a calf feeder, you should still look at them at least twice a day. It's easier to observe signs of ill health when they're not being fed, like when they're resting, because if they're feeding, it can mask the signs. So and Catherine will go through some of these signs of calf health and treatment in her presentation. Just mentioned the importance of isolation pens. Have those available, because it can help reduce the spread of infection if you can remove the calf that is sick. Vaccination may be an option for you, especially if you've had issues on the farm before. You should discuss this with your vet. There are options of vaccinating the mother before she calves to help protect the calf when it's born, or else even for pneumonia vaccines. If pneumonia is an issue on your farm, it can help. It won't solve all your problems, but it is another tool in your toolbox. And then just also what we also encourage is, you know, not to forget about the importance of pain relief. Even when you're dehorning, it's very painful and stressful on the calf, and it can knock the calf, and kind of affect their performance while also being painful. So it can help a lot to have given them pain relief before you do this to limit that knock-on effect. So what I've mentioned here, they're all little things, but by doing all these little things right, you will have a big effect. I suppose there's no one silver bullet, which this shows, but you know, it's really attention to detail in all these areas is what's important. So this is a checklist which I'm like any of you could really put together, but I suppose it's just handy to have it all on the one place. You know, just have a good equipment makes everything easier, and you can move or work more efficiently if you have these equipment and you're not looking for it. To have enough of them buckets, feeding tops, if you're feeding newborn calves, to have 3 litre bottles, because 2 litres probably isn't really enough for most calves, but have 2 of them, just at least 2 of them in case you have to feed sick calf or anything. And one, like if you have to feed the sick calf electrolytes or anything, keep one of those bottles for that. You don't want to be mixing between newborns and sick calves. Have stomach tubes that work. Again, you need kind of 2, one for sick and one for healthy calves. A mixer for mixing the milk replacer properly. Even if you don't have an automatic one, then a whisk works very well, and it just, again, speeds up the process. A fridge to store colostrum. If you don't store the colostrum in a fridge, it goes off very quickly because the bacteria builds up in it. So if you store it in the fridge, it can last for 2 days, and alternatively a freezer if possible to store surplus colostrum for times when it's short. The easiest way to defrost colostrum is if it's stored in a strong freezer bag. So there are also things that are handy to have, and they don't take up as much space in the freezer as a milk carton or milk bottle. So cleaning equipment, hot water, brushes, disinfectant, I guess. Milton or dilute peracetic acid are good for dissolving the biofilm that milk causes and to reduce the buildup of bacteria. Like there's a lot of calves drinking out of this equipment, so it's important to have everything as clean as possible. Tags, obviously, a notebook to record, or an app if you're that way inclined to record, you know, dates of births. If you notice any calf off that you want to check later, or that someone else can check later, or if you want to record if you're giving an extra feed, you know, it makes it very easy for the next person to come along and watch the calves after if you have good records. Good quality electrolytes, you'll never know when you need them, and you know they don't cost the world, so it's always handy to have a few spare. Or there is a recipe on the AHI website to make your own. It's a combination of bread soda, salt, and glucose. But I won't even try and rhyme that off there now. But it's on the website, and Catherine probably knows it off by heart anyway. So also just remember, as I mentioned, to research the quality of the milk replacer and the concentrates you're buying. Basically, you want skim milk to be the main source of protein, and the other ingredients are very important. Again, we have a leaflet on this on the website. Red light and calf jackets, and make a plan with your vet if you want more advice on vaccination. It's very hard to go through it all here tonight, but there are options, and don't be afraid to ask. I suppose from practice, when I was going around, everyone thought they were the only farm with a problem, you know, if they were having a calf problem or a cow problem. But every farmer has a calf or a cow problem at some stage. So, you know, don't be afraid to ask, and get help as quickly as possible before it becomes too much of a problem. So I'll stop sharing now. I might ask Catherine to try and share her slides.
Can you hear me, firstly? Thanks, Michelle.
Okay. Yeah.
And presumably, hopefully.
Yeah, you can see it's not in slideshow yet.
Is that it now?
Yeah, it is. Thanks.
Lovely. Thanks a million. So thanks very much for the introduction, Michelle. I'm not sure I necessarily agree with all of that, but thanks a million. As Michelle mentioned, I am a vet working in the herd health department in the vet school in UCD. I have a very lucky job in that I get to be involved with calf health, both across the spheres of research, teaching, but also from the point of view of herd health investigation up and down the country. And anybody who knows me knows I'm very passionate about calf health. So I better get started if we want to get you out of here at a reasonable hour. What Michelle didn't mention though was that I'm mostly a wannabe dairy farmer. And I'm delighted to get the opportunity to speak. So I have a fear of social media, but I do have a quiet Twitter account where I sit there quietly and observe all things ag. So when I seen this group forming, I was quite excited. So I was certainly very privileged to be given the opportunity to speak this evening. So thanks a million. What I'm going to speak a little bit about is calf health from, risk factors from the point of view around cow management, colostrum, because colostrum is king in all things related to calves. I'm going to talk a little bit about calf nutrition. I guess that could be a whole several hours discussion on its own, but I'll allude to some of the key principles and have a whistle-stop tour of some of the key health issues. And then I'll obviously be happy to be involved for any questions. You can make sure and stop me now if there's any technical glitches there. So ultimately, we all know that calf rearing is a significant cost, huge cost to the dairy farm, and getting it right is easier said than done. So I guess there's recipe. What do we need? I suppose ideally we want cows to calve without any major calving problems, and we don't really want any major issues with perinatal mortality, and we want good. So that really all comes down to management of the cow and calf around calving. We need to maximise all things to do with colostrum to ensure that calves get adequate passive transfer of immunity. We need to maximise our growth rates, minimise the sickness that we come across, get the calf weaned successfully from a essentially monogastric animal, very much like ourselves in the early phase, to a functional ruminant, and do all of that without them getting sick or dying. So it's actually quite a lot of components in terms of the successful rearing of calves to try and get them, well, first alive and well, but eventually to get them to breeding and subsequently to calving. So I guess the terms of the cow and the management factors around management or around the cow that might have an impact on calf health, things like the age and weight of heifers. So obviously anything we can do to try and get our heifers to calve at 24 months, because before that and after that certainly increases the risks around stillbirth and so on. The body condition score of cows and heifers is actually super important, so we can get into the nitty-gritty of detail there in terms of over fat cows will be more likely to suffer milk fever, have slow calvings, have issues with colostrum and so on, but equally very thin cows can have issues with colostrum quality. So target and BCS actually will have an impact on, to calve down in the right body condition score will have an impact on calf health as well as everything else around transition. The diet of the cow is something that gets quite a lot of attention in terms of its role in calf health, but it's actually extremely difficult to manipulate colostrum by the cow's diet. She'd really want to be getting really terrible silage or, straw only or something like that for her to have poor quality colostrum, but we can certainly improve the quality by having a decent dry cow mineral going in there, because it's not only about the antibodies in colostrum, but also vitamins and minerals and things that will be going that we're paying for in a dry cow mineral that we will have some benefit in terms of the calf. And as Michelle mentioned, farms that are seeing issues with calf scour, we can go down the road of vaccinating our cows 3 weeks to 3 months before calving to try and increase the number of antibodies that those cows produce against certain scour pathogens in their colostrum. So as well as all of that, how the cow actually is managed at and around the calving event itself can certainly have a role in terms of calf health. So one of the common things that we would get asked to investigate in UCD would be an increase in perinatal mortality or stillbirths that are happening, at or around calving, particularly around heifers and so on. And of course, we can always have the nasty infectious causes, but very often group changes and, moving cows that are sick of calving rather than either well before or in the throes of calving, which would technically be better, can actually have an impact on things like that. So that's an important one. And of course, we want the right level of supervision, but we don't want too much intervention or equally well, not too little. So it can be hard to pinpoint it just right. But all of those things will feed into the outcomes around calf health at the end of the season. And then, of course, the calf themselves, the golden hour. And that really, in that short window after they're born, how they're managed, whether they land on a nice clean bed of straw and are warm, how quickly, that they're kept in a clean environment. And all of those things are important in terms of whether, you know, things like navel ill and so on. So colostrum, I actually didn't put in a slide here because I think, you know, the importance of colostrum goes without saying. So cattle are, unlike many other species that will have some transfer of immunity in utero, calves do not. So they rely solely on the colostrum feed to get their immune system up and going. And there is little to no transfer of antibodies against disease across the placenta. So the cow is very well adapted to spend the last few weeks before she calves accumulating all those nice antibodies out of her blood and concentrating it in high quality colostrum for the calf. The drawback to this physiological phenomenon is that the second the cow calves, she is no longer producing high quality colostrum. She's starting to transition to milk, and colostrum and milk are very different things. And it's diluting the very good quality colostrum. So, which is why, which I'll come back to in a moment, the quality of colostrum is largely related to that first milking, which is the number 1 in the 1-2-3 rule, and how quickly we can collect that colostrum. So as well as the timing of collection, which is probably the single biggest factor influencing colostrum quality, we have other things like bacterial contamination. So how cleanly we harvest colostrum, collect it off the cow and get it into the calf will also have an impact. But also, you know, things storage. So Michelle alluded to it there. There's going to be bacteria in colostrum. It is not sterile. The udder is not sterile, and it will multiply every 20 minutes. If we can refrigerate it, we will slow down that bacterial contamination and the multiplication of that bacteria quite substantially. But if we don't refrigerate it, then I guess it's anybody's guess in terms of the bacterial load. So that can certainly be an issue. Obviously, higher yielding cows can have an issue with colostrum quality just through dilution. The nutrition, as I mentioned, it is difficult to actually manipulate colostrum quality, but certainly very low protein silages, not much dry cow minerals, things like that will have an impact maybe on other things apart from the antibody level. So it certainly will have an indirect impact on colostrum quality. Short dry periods, cows with mastitis, cows running milk before they calve, and pooling again for the dilution. So those factors that would be very commonly encountered can all impact the colostrum quality. And, you know, although across the last 10 years, our passive transfer of immunity, as it's called, the successful practice of getting enough colostrum in quickly enough has really improved as an industry. And the data that comes from the regional veterinary laboratories from post-morteming dead calves shows that, you know, that it is becoming less of an issue. However, it is still the number 1 issue in calves that are presented, you know, for post-mortem, particularly those calves under a month of age. So it's still super important. The 1-2-3 rule, as Michelle mentioned, is still the key piece of advice. And again, there's lots of resources there on the AHI website should you wish to pursue any more detail around that. I don't want to get too data heavy, but this was a project done on Irish colostrum samples a couple of years ago by colleagues in UCD. And interestingly, we measure colostrum quality by a number of things. So we look at how much antibodies are in there. I'll talk about the Brix refractometer in a couple of slides' time, and we look for this arbitrary value of above 22% on a Brix refractometer that says that those samples are adequate to feed to a calf. So we can see here that lots of samples didn't meet the standard for quality in terms of enough antibodies, but what was quite also worrying was that there was more samples that actually, had bacterial contamination that was, exceeded the threshold that would be suitable to feed to the calf. So when we would go with our investigation hat on to a farm that was maybe running into issues with big scar outbreak and maybe high issues with calf mortality, things like that, one of the things we'll really look at is the colostrum quality in extreme detail. So we'll measure the colostrum on a Brix, we'll take blood samples from the calves and so on. But what we'll also do is sometimes look at, actually culture a few samples of colostrum. So what we can have antibodies, or we can have colostrum that looks good to be feeding to a calf. So it can look fine on a Brix refractometer, but we can still be having health issues on the farm. And that's where we'll really distill into the detail of how it's collected and stored. because that's really where, you know, you get that bacterial multiplication. And what happens when you've got lots of bacteria in colostrum is that the bacteria stick on to the antibodies and they end up stopping the calf absorbing it. So even though it might look like it has lots of antibodies, if it's not nice and clean and refrigerated properly and so on, then you can have, you know, too much bacteria in there, and that can certainly have an impact on how successful the calf will absorb it or not. So I suppose the key things around perinatal mortality, as I alluded to there, will be around kind of, you know, managing the group changes in a group calving pen and how the calf is managed in that first couple of hours after calving. But really the be all and end all is colostrum. So getting good quality colostrum collected quickly after the cow calves and cleanly stored properly and fed as quickly as possible. And you know, ideally 3 litres, you could translate that to about 8.5% of body weight. You know, if you've got small crossbred calves, something like that, that were, you know, or equally well if we have bigger calves. But in around 3 litres of cleanly harvested, good quality colostrum. And as I mentioned there on the last slide, the timing of delivery of it, you know, the bacterial contamination in it will actually have major impacts on the success or failure of that endeavour, as much as, you know, giving enough and so on. So the absorption of colostrum, there's a lot in the detail. I think if you're not having issues, I wouldn't worry too much. If a problem isn't broken or a system isn't broken, you don't need to worry about fixing it. But within I think the 1, 2, 3 rule of colostrum is fairly well trotted out now in terms of, you know, get from the first milking in the first 2 hours and give at least 3 litres. But I think we can go a step further and say, well, actually now we're really distilling into, you know, is my colostrum as good a quality as it needs to be at the point of feeding to that calf? So in terms of calf health, that's a critical control point. And infectious pressure, I'll come back to, and as Michelle has already alluded to, that comes down to you know, how hygienically we can manage the calf feeding equipment and the pens and so on. So we can, of course, measure colostrum quality by measuring it ideally with a Brix refractometer. So there are things floating around called colostrometers. They're okay, and you can just pop it in a cylinder of colostrum and measure it like it's a colour. You read off the colour scale. They are temperature dependent, so they're not, you have to cool the colostrum when you take it from the cow for it to be technically useful. So a Brix refractometer is much easier in that you can just drop a little bit on the slide or on the slide of the equipment there and read straight off a scale. So 22% is what we're targeting. Anything above that is of good or excellent quality to be fed to a calf. And that can all be done on farm. You can get those on Amazon for about €30 the last time I checked. And we can, of course, check it at the calf side, but that would require a blood sample between kind of 1 to 10 days of age done by your vet. So that's a bit more invasive. Certainly on some of the larger units, I know that they would be using you know, screens of calves, 10 or 12 calves intermittently across the calving season, checked by your vet, you know, to look at the colostrum management and to see how things are going. So it is certainly used as a screening tool as well as a disease investigation tool. But I guess that's more invasive than, you know, being able to monitor the colostrum on farm. So we want to get that colostrum in cleanly and quickly after calving, store it properly if we have to store it, and give enough high quality as soon as possible. So I think it's safe to say that it is certainly a lot easier said than done, and there's a lot more to colostrum than the 1, 2, 3 rule. So that's probably all I can say about it. I think it can't be overstated, and although we've made a lot of progress as an industry with colostrum over the years, we still have a ways to go based on the data from the calves presented for postmortem. So moving away from that now altogether, to talk a tiny bit about calf nutrition. And this is something, again, I could chat for possibly longer than my 20 to 30 minute slot on. But I think it's important, I suppose, to start by looking at calves as, we call them pseudo-monogastric. So they're sort of pretend monogastric animals that are similar in digestion to ourselves, to dogs, to pigs. For the first 4 to 5, maybe even 6 weeks of their life. Certainly the first 4 weeks of their life, they rely solely on the abomasum to digest milk, which is the true stomach. And then they go through this transition phase from about, 4 to 6, 8 weeks on. And then eventually they become a functional ruminant with development of that rumen to process a non-milk diet at weaning. So they have quite a lot to do in terms of the development of their digestive system. So at birth, you'll often hear people or advice saying, you know, get the colostrum in. If you can't get it in with a bottle and teat or a bucket and teat, that it's fine to stomach tube it, and it is. But when you stomach tube a calf, the tube automatically goes into the rumen. And the reason that it's fine for colostrum in the early days is that the rumen is so small, it's very underdeveloped. And it'll just spill over into the abomasum where it needs to go to be digested and absorbed. The same is not true as the calf reaches 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks old. That rumen is getting bigger and bigger every day. And if we were then to stomach tube milk, perhaps to a sick calf or something like that, then it goes into the rumen, and that's, you know, where it could ferment and it won't be digested and so on. So that's an important difference. It's perfectly fine for colostrum in those early few days and so on. But really, when a calf gets older, then we don't want to be stomach tubing milk, but it's perfectly fine for electrolytes. So the pre-weaning stage, the abomasum is really the key. And the rumen is so very underdeveloped. And really, it is the process of calf rearing is really about trying to stimulate that rumen to develop so that it can eventually process starter and eventually then forage whenever they're weaned. So ideally, we need to make sure that calves have access to clean palatable starter from the first few days of life, even though they will take very negligible amounts early on, and also clean water, because it's the water that ferments the starter that actually drives that rumen development and helps transition that calf to a functional ruminant at weaning. So that's important. I guess really where the whole trade-off happens is that calf growth efficiency is highest on milk. So they are designed to do really well on milk in the pre-weaning phase. And I won't go into it so much now, but certainly there is lots of studies around epigenetics that shows that how a calf grows pre-weaning actually can have a downstream impact on, you know, upregulating and turning on its genes for its later life in terms of production of milk solids, fertility outcomes, and so on. So how we manage them pre-weaning does actually have a later impact. And really, although we want to grow them on milk and grow them well, then obviously it's also the most expensive and highest input. So we need to be able to feed them enough, but also be able to, you know, the trade-off is to be able to get them weaned at some satisfactory time. So pre-weaning is really about that fine balance between weight gain, rumen development, and the cost. So in terms of voluntary feed intake, you know, suckler animals or a calf left to feed to its own devices will take in at least, you know, up to 20% of its body weight and more in a day if it was allowed to. Of course, that's perfectly fine for a suckler calf that can drink from its mum several times a day. The same is not true for an artificially reared dairy calf, because that would be fine. We could feed them 20% of body weight, no problem. And actually, quite interestingly, there's a renewed focus on feed levels and feed rates in calves. So some of you may be aware in New Zealand, they're currently recommending to feed 20% of body weight for the first 3 weeks, and they've totally moved away from once a day feeding until over 3 weeks of age. That's a by the by, but an interesting in the 20% feed rate. So that's perfectly fine, but there has to come a trade-off. If we're going to keep feeding calves at 20% of body weight, it'll be impossible to get the rumen developed enough to get them weaned. It'll be obviously take much longer. So the balance really is that we pick a bit less than that. So traditionally, the historic advice would have been to feed a calf 10% of body weight, which would have been for a 40 kilo calf, 4 litres of milk, 2 litres morning and evening. However, when we back calculate that, that's actually just about enough for maintenance and keeping them standing looking at us, but it does actually provide very little for growth and thrive. And what a calf also needs from its milk is not only to keep it alive and well, in terms of its immune system functioning, it also needs milk to keep warm under 3 weeks of age. So, you know, a cold stress on top of a slightly underfed calf usually results in sick calves. So cold calves and underfed calves tend to become, you know, sick calves, and they're probably two of the biggest risk factors in calf disease outbreaks under 4, you know, in that early or first month of life. So the trade-off that we find, you know, to say, look, we need to feed them more than 10% of body weight, but we also need something sensible to get them weaned. And this is an industry standard. We're recommending to feed at least 15% of body weight fed across 2 feeds, which translates to, for, you know, most 40 kilo calves, about 6 litres of whole milk or good quality milk replacer. 750 grams or 900, depending on whether it's 125 grams or 150 grams per litre, but always check the instructions, because each milk replacer product will vary slightly. So I've put in there fed across 2 feeds. Certainly, at least the AHI and Teagasc advises that we wouldn't consider dropping to once a day until a calf is a minimum of 4 weeks old. I am involved in some work with the EU Animal Health and Welfare project at the moment, and there's a huge drive and focus on calf feeding, where they're looking to get that increased to 6 weeks, and they're looking to change the wording of EU law. So again, that's something that's work ongoing in the background, but I would suggest that we certainly would feed twice a day until a minimum of 4 weeks, and that's, if we're going to drop to once a day, that we wouldn't consider it until they breach the month of age at least, and ideally maybe 6 weeks. So a quick note on calf milk replacer. I guess for those of you who are feeding calves, this is kind of old news, but I think important again, in terms of that we just, at this time of the year, particularly if we've staff feeding calves, or it's not just one person responsible for calf feeding, that everybody's on the same page about how we mix it up, because quite often when we go, there can be slight variations in concentration and so on, and it can depend on whether. So when we talk about feeding 150 grams per litre, that's 150 grams made up to a litre, as opposed to a litre with 150 grams added. Now, automatic feeders will calculate their concentration slightly differently, so and that will differ depending on the product. But just a quick one that might be useful at this time of the year. I'm certainly a fan of the SOPs again. I suppose it depends on how many people are involved. So as Michelle mentioned, there is more detailed resources on evaluating calf milk replacer quality on the AHI website. And Teagasc also have very nice resources on this. And really, if we think about it, cow's milk is very high protein, high fat, high lactose. All the things that the dairy industry, the manufacturing industry need and also make lots of money from. So it's it's a bit of a trade-off in making milk replacer, in that, it tends to be slightly lower protein, it's certainly lower fat, and they can be higher lactose. So most good quality milk replacers will be in the region of 23 to 26% crude protein, and the quality is largely determined by the type of the protein source that is in there. So obviously, as we've seen on the last slide, the dairy protein in whole milk is what their calves are designed for. And then obviously when we milk replacer, we have a bit of a trade-off, but like everything else in life, it follows price. So the higher quality ones tend to also be the most expensive. But certainly we want calves on either whole milk, skim milk powder, or a whey protein concentrate. So in terms of protein quality, now the skim milk powder or even a whey protein based milk replacer are perfectly adequate. And again, they have advantages and disadvantages over each other. But the idea, I suppose, is that they are, animal-based protein. So in terms of our growth rates of calves, there's no point in feeding a 26% protein milk replacer if we don't give them enough energy to digest it. So that can happen, and we sometimes can see that on calves on auto feeders, and to be mess around with the curves and so on. But ultimately we want to feed enough energy and protein to get the most growth out of them whilst they're on that high rate of expensive input milk replacer. And then we need to get them weaned off it successfully at some kind of intermediate point. So ideally, in terms of milk replacers, we want to, develop a routine, stick to it, the feed at the same time each day, use the same equipment, weigh the powder at the start of the season, or at least after, a new batch of feed and so on, so that we know exactly that the dilution and concentrations and so on are correct. And ideally we would measure performance. So that would require, not every calf needs to be weighed, but certainly, 10 or 15% of a group with a weigh tape, time permitting, we could look at weights across the rearing season. It might be useful to look at the average daily gains, because they can be hugely variable. Again, it's possibly something that there may not be time, but can be useful, particularly if we're interested in that growth and performance piece. So moving on from the milk replacers, then the other key component of calf nutrition would be calf starter. So they need it from the first few days of life, or at least access to it from within their first week, even though they'll take negligible amounts until they hit that transition phase at a week, at a month old or so. And obviously, the less milk, the more starter, and so on. So we certainly want them to develop their rumen during that transition phase successfully so that we can get them weaned. If there are issues with low or problematic intakes around starter, then that certainly usually will result in a growth check at or around weaning. It's important that it needs to be palatable, so it needs to be clean and fresh, cleaned out and so on. We do ideally want a calf consuming a minimum of 1 kilo of concentrate per day pre-weaning as a sort of proxy measure that they have a functional rumen. And ideally, we would work on something like an 18% protein type calf starter. And as I mentioned previously, water is as key and a component as anything else, because without the water, the rumen wall doesn't develop. And that's an interesting graphic. I'm sure it's shown in many's a calf talk, but I think the key point is there that the wall of the rumen is an extremely specialized piece of kit for the cow in later life, for how they basically take most of the good out of their feed, and it really needs to be successfully developed during that weaning or pre-weaning phase. So the milk and grain is the key point, as opposed to the other pictures that are showing their very underdeveloped rumen wall. So forage is also important, but not so important in the early days. So we actually, what we don't want a situation is where a calf will, take forage at the expense of starter, because that can impact how, again, successfully their rumen will develop, because it's really the fermentation of the volatile fatty acids in the starter that drives that rumen development. So we certainly can offer straw if it's, clean, if they're being bedded on straw and getting plenty of clean bedding topped up and so on, then we don't necessarily have to give it as an extra feed. But we don't want to be offering very, sweet hay or something like that they might take in preference to starter, as that can certainly impact weaning. So ideally, but not to forget that it will be hugely important, shortly after weaning. So ideally, people talk about targets for, 8 weeks, 10 weeks, 80 kilos, 100 kilos. Largely that is arbitrary, and I suppose equates to, and it's perfectly fine to use those metrics, because they're often used as a proxy measure that a calf that has reached those kind of targets is likely to be taking enough starter intake. But ideally we would look at, are they in a decent amount of meal, and that really will tell us if their rumen is ready for a non-milk diet. We want to ensure that weaning, which is highly stressful for them, does not collide with something else like dehorning or major group changes to increase the stress on the calf. If there is issues with summer scar, which I won't go into in detail just now, but then that's something where we might have to look at a detailed overhaul of weaning. And the growth rate can be as a useful metric, as I mentioned already. So I don't want to delay too long on nutrition, just a kind of a quick overview. And to finish, I just have alluded to some of the key diseases, which you'll be, I suppose, all too familiar with, as every farm in the country has to deal with them. But I think the interesting point, is that no farm escapes the pathogens as such. That it is this interaction between the pathogen for the animal and their environment that usually, results in, if we run into issues with disease and so on. So the principles of any infectious disease control, human or animal, is about trying to make their immune system as robust as it possibly can and reduce the amount of bugs in their environment or the infectious pressure. The calf scar agents, Cryptosporidium and coccidiosis, are the two parasitic causes, or most common parasitic causes of calf scar in Ireland. Coccidiosis, or blood scar, won't hit them till they're about 2.5 or 3 weeks of age or older. Crypto from any age. Important because crypto is actually zoonotic. So if we do have issues with crypto, it is a risk of human infection, particularly, young children or older people or anybody with an immunocompromised immune system. So just to be aware, and it is our second most common pathogen in Ireland, so hugely prevalent. Rotavirus and coronavirus would be the two most common viral causes of calf diarrhea, and Salmonella and E. coli. E. coli really only in the first sort of week or 10 days of life. After that, it tends to be not so much of a causative pathogen. We certainly can't tell what it is, so ideally we would try and get our samples away to the vet, or get a diagnosis of what we're dealing with in terms of to try and tackle what's in front of us. So ultimately, no matter what the cause or the etiological or infectious agent, the fecal oral route, or as I heard a friend once call it, the shit in mouth route, and that is essentially the way it spreads. The calf has to come into contact with the dung from another calf. But I suppose to put some context on that, things like crypto are so infectious that in a teaspoon of calf scour, there will be millions and millions of infective oocysts, and it only takes, less than 50 to set up an infection in that calf. So 1 or 2 scouring calves, and certainly we ramp the infection up in the environment, extremely. So it's a unfortunately hugely infectious. The calf immune system has a role, because after about 4 weeks, the mucosal immunity inside the gut itself tends to become more developed, and they're a bit more robust and so on. But in that early stage, in the first 4 weeks, they're highly susceptible creatures. The environment is ultimately the main source of where calves get infected from, whether that's licking the nose of or coat of another calf, the shed and so on, but also things like feeding equipment and things like that. And whatever comes in first tends to, wipe away the nice protective outer coating on the intestines, and then whatever, they tend to get secondary issues, and they start scouring, losing all their water and electrolytes. And then comes the staggering calf with the sunken eye, the very dirty coat that, maybe then eventually isn't able to stand and so on when it gets particularly severe. So the clinical signs, I'm sure everyone knows, the unfortunate reality of scouring calves. Treatment, again, some of the principles around treatment are really remove if possible. I realize, and it comes back to that point of how ridiculously infectious most of the agents are, and 1 or 2 calves getting it will certainly become 10 or 12 calves getting it quickly, but it's often highly impractical in group housed calves to remove them, and fair enough. If we do manage to get them super early, it might be worth trying to isolate where possible, at least to try and reduce the infection pressure, even though we mightn't stop other calves getting it. The mainstay really is fluids, rehydration to try and replace what they've lost. Most calves, if they're still standing, will be managed with oral rehydration solutions or electrolytes in addition to their milk feeds. And usually that will do them. Obviously, if they're off their feet and so on, they probably need the vet and the drip and the more severe treatment. The reference there for calf electrolytes, you can certainly make up your own. That's as good as you'll get. Low salt, it is important that it is low salt because it's the potassium in it that's important. So you can buy that in Tesco's. Bread soda is also important because if you get bicarbonate of soda, there's an acid in it, and it's fizzy, so it needs specifically to be bread soda, and glucose, all of which you can usually get in Tesco's. So there's no problem making up your own, weighing them out and making them up, or you can certainly buy the ready-made packets. The idea of rehydration is that calves that are scouring are offered 2 litres of fluid in addition to their milk feeds. So, maybe at lunchtime or in the, away from the milk feeds, that they're getting 4 litres extra per day. And that milk certainly does not worsen scour. It's been a strongly disproven theory. That is only if the calf is able to drink it. So we're not suggesting that they need to be tubed milk or anything like that, but if they're able to drink it, they should get it. And other treatments will really depend on what you're dealing with. So, ultimately a calf that has scour that is maybe off its feed for a few days, even may or may not have to be seen by the vet if it has a temperature outside of range. Those are calves probably do need an antibiotic. But certainly not every calf that gets diarrhea needs an antibiotic, because largely they are not bacterial in origin. And obviously crypto will have some specific treatments. So calf pneumonia, calf blowing is...
Sorry, Catherine.
Yeah.
We're nearly at your time, so if I hate to interrupt you, but if we have to take questions and get Jill to speak. So.
Okay, grand. Yeah, I can skip the rest. No, I can just...
I'm just giving you notice. Fine.
No worries. I'll skip the pneumonia piece.
Sorry.
then. And I suppose just to conclude, really, in terms of the calf health key principles, colostrum, I suppose, is the be all and end all in terms of having enough good quality in place, an SOP for ensuring that it's, most calves get treated the same, getting calves fed often enough on the correct plane of nutrition. Well, because again, underfed calves, that affects their ability to fight disease. Routine is important. Obviously, if we were looking for signs of health, we try to do it away from feeding when they're excited. We, should feed the youngest calf on the farm first, moving to the oldest vaccination protocols, whether that is cows for calf scour or calves themselves for pneumonia, again, depending on the individual farm. And then ultimately the minimizing the challenge or the amount of bugs they're exposed to really comes down to how we clean things. The adequate housing is key. So space availability is probably one that can't be overstated. So overstocking is a huge problem, obviously. So we want ideally about 2 meters squared per calf. Addressing the controllable environmental factors. So if we need to get heat, we add more bedding, add calf jackets, those kind of things. Early identification of treatment and trying to identify other concurrent stressors that we would, to try and mitigate. So, things like adding pain relief in addition to your local anaesthetic will have a further impact on reducing the stress that it have. Disinfection protocols and so on. So I suppose those 2 slides are really to summarize the calf health piece in terms of how we can promote their immune system and reduce the amount of bugs they come across. I have skipped the pneumonia piece entirely in the interest of time. I've included a protocol there for washing, but I can come back to it. So colostrum is everything. Routine is key. If we can, make a feeding and weaning plan now and try to avoid underfed or cold stress calves because they tend to get sick. Keeping them warm, particularly up to 4 weeks after that, they can thermoregulate much better. We can't overstate the importance of hygiene everywhere. That's all. Thank you very much. Sorry if I went over time there, Michelle. I was watching it here. So.
Thanks, Catherine. Sorry for rushing you in the end. One of the questions is about hygiene of buckets there, actually. So we might get you to come back to that in a minute. Okay.
I can look at the questions here. Yeah. Calf gets its own mother's colostrum. Look, that's the gold standard, particularly for things like Johne's disease, on farm. Then obviously that's hugely important because it can be traced then, at least that you have some way of tracing it. Obviously it's not practical in all situations. So, it depends what works for the farm. If you have to pool that, you can pool from the 2 or 3 cows calved previously, because obviously the pooling has a dilution effect. Do many of you feed the calf straight from the cow? That I will leave to recommend using disinfectants. On a daily basis, they certainly need to be washed on a daily basis, but you could do like a proper wash once a week, something like that. I think that would be sensible. Did I miss ones?
No, I'd say that was it. Oh, well, there's
recommended substitute for colostrum. Yeah, ideally, then other colostrum from another cow on your farm that has met the antibodies and everything for the bugs, has made the antibody for the bugs on your farm. Colostrum is a vehicle of disease transfer also, so ideally you don't want to be getting it from another farm, but I would rather give it from a neighbour's farm than I would give a packet of colostrum, which isn't great. So in order, get it from another cow on your farm, if you need to make a store, or from another, from somewhere better than the packets. I think that's it, is it?
Yep, that's it. Thanks.
Okay.
If there are any more, we might have time at the end, but we're conscious that people will probably want to get out of here by 9, so we'll give Jill her go there now, if that's okay, Jill. Thanks, Catherine, that was brilliant.
Now, can somebody help share screen for me? Hang on. There we go. Oh, there we go. Sorry, I'm a bit slow on the uptake.
It was like that too.
I know. Christmas will kill you, wouldn't it? Here we go. I'll just press this. I can move that.
It's not in slideshow yet.
Just gonna. There we go. Now, tell me if you can see it.
Yep, perfect. Thank you.
First and foremost, I want to say thank you so much. I love listening to Catherine. I I often feel like after listening to Catherine before the calving period, I'd love to have a mini Catherine sitting on my shoulder for the entirety of the whole, calving period, just telling me what I shouldn't do it on this, on a daily basis, because all of that information is just so important. And the thing is, every single bit of it actually makes a difference. So first and foremost, thank you to Michelle and Anya and the DWI group for inviting me to speak tonight. I don't know how much I can add here, because both Michelle and Catherine covered so much. But what I will go through is what we do on the farm here, and mainly what I'm going to focus on very tightly is the absolute non-negotiables when it comes to the calving period here. So, and I go through, when we're going through the calving season, the things that I just will not do without. So some people might think that, all these people speaking tonight, they're all vets. They don't know what it's like to be on a farm in the middle of spring and to be up to your eyes in scour. What I can say I certainly do. Because when I started I started farming in 2009, I thought that I knew better. I thought I was managing things in a way that was right. I thought that we were doing everything correctly. And in reality, there was massive room for improvement. And every year we would have some degree of an outbreak of scour. There would have been rota, there would have been corona, there was crypto. And I look back through the farm diaries, because we keep a diary every spring, and you could go back the years and you can see scour outbreaks, severe scour outbreaks from the second week of February. And that once you get a scour outbreak, that it's there for the remainder of the calving season. So, if you can avoid it or push it out as late as possible, that's kind of where you want to go to. And when I look at how we manage our calving and our calving season today, and I see how much the situation has improved, it's unrecognizably different from then to now. And these are the key areas. And really, if you have an overview, just an overview picture of what do you want to happen? You want a healthy cow to calve in a clean environment. You want that calf to receive excellent quality colostrum within 2 hours. And we want the colostrum to successfully cross that cut wall, delivering high levels of immunoglobulins for a strong immune system. And we want that calf to be reared in a suitable environment with low infection pressure. And, that sounds really simple, right? But oftentimes it doesn't work out that way. But the key areas to focus on in preparation to calving it's all about the cow, the calf, and the environment, and how all that works together. Like for the cow, just like Catherine has already covered this really, really well, we want her to be healthy, to produce good quality colostrum. So her diet and her dry cow minerals and the vaccine protocol that she gets are, as part of her dry cow management, are key areas here. For the calf, again, we want that 1, 2, 3 thing. Definitely, we want them to, that 3 liters within 2 hours birth from the first milk of a cow, and I'll go a bit beyond that in this discussion here. And then for the environment, where the calf is born, where it is raised, and this plays a key role and influence in health outcomes. And then again, to look back at stressors. So any stress is a gateway for a disease, and how we manage stressors is key. And the thing about stressors is that we have avoidable stressors and we have unavoidable stressors. So avoidable stressors would be, like Catherine mentioned there, nutrition. Maybe if we were not feeding our calves adequately, then nutrition is a stressor, but it's an avoidable stressor in that you can do better around calf nutrition if nutrition is your stressor. Or if you're going to get a shock of cold weather is going to be a stressor, and you can do things to avoid that. You can increase, you can invest in calf jackets, or you could increase your straw so that they can nest and create a little micro environment that's warm around them. But again, small things that we might not think a whole pile about. So let's say a leaking water trough inside in a calf pen, something that's just continually dripping. That is an avoidable stressor. And why is that a stressor? Because water in a calf environment increases humidity in the air, and that creates better environment for bacteria to grow. So the unavoidable stressors then, if you think of that, is things that we know are going to happen. So weaning, dehorning, turnout. These are stressors, and we can navigate how and when these happen in order to decrease their impact as a stressor for the calf. So let's start with, hopefully that's going to change. Let's start with the calf environment. We'll start with this one. Local knowledge is key, and it hasn't been mentioned yet, but local knowledge on where you are within the country can impact on we'd say the forage that you're feeding to cows. This is important just for coming from our own perspective. If you look on the map on the left, you have two kind of areas there where there are soils with low iodine status. And if you look on the map on the right, you have selenium status of low selenium status marked in green. So both iodine and selenium are very, very much key. They're trace elements, but key trace elements in terms of cow immunity and calf immunity. It's very, very important that to be aware of how your locality can impact on your on the health of your cows or your animals. So just to have that, maybe you need to look at tweaking your dry cow mineral in order to accommodate for just localized deficiencies in your area. Just a small thing to be aware of, because lots of people say that to me often. So to start out then, we'll start with the environment, and we'll start with the calving environment. And this is just a picture I took from the internet of like a standard calving house. And when you look at this, I think what can be improved here? What does your shed look like, and what can be improved? And what are the risks in this environment in terms of calf health? And if you look at them there, you can see, okay, it's kind of overcrowded. The level of straw there is, that's going to be fairly mucky in the morning time. So we want our calf to be born into this environment. So what can we do here? And on our farm, what we did is that we popped one of these into our calving shed. Now, I call this the hot tub because basically it's got an infrared lamp over the top, which makes it hot, and it's a plastic tub, so a hot tub. And it creates a separate but clean environment for a newborn calf. And as soon as the calf is born, it goes straight into the hot tub. And all those little buckets on the front, they're really useful, because I put, with say, the likes of the tiger into one of it, and into the other one, I'm putting 10% iodine spray for the umbilical cord. And it helps with workflow. And I know that, when my calf's in the calf tub, when I bring up my colostrum, I'm ready to go, and everything is set, and the calf is drying and warm. And it is also a safe environment for both me and the calf, away from the cows. So that's a really, really simple thing. Those, I've often put 2 calves inside in that, and they're spacious enough, and they're just they're so easy to, like, you could lift a 10-year-old could lift one of those, and you can just lift out that floor mat from it, and it can be cleaned and power hosed and cleaned really, really quickly and dry out. So they're really, really handy things to have. Again, your speedy feeder there, and Michelle mentioned it already, a speedy feeder for your newborn calves, but also a second speedy feeder for sick animals. Do not skimp on having using one speedy feeder for both newborn animals and for sick calves. So then when we come to this is a typical shed, and you say, is this shed clean? Well, it has just been power hosed. It must be clean, right? But I could put my hand on the wall there, and if I, where it's stained brown, and my hand would come away clean when I took it away. But we know that that's just not good enough. It's that shed is still dirty. And even though that concrete wall is clean around it, that you're still carrying fecal matter there on the wall. And we know from what Catherine said earlier, fecal matter can carry lots of bugs. So we need to make a really, really big effort in this area. And like Catherine said, there is as little as 50 of these oocysts with the likes of crypto or coccidia. They can infect a calf, and when 50 are ingested, they go into the gut and they're replicated up, and you end up having millions being excreted out the other end. So you go from having a very, very low burden to having an incredibly high burden of these tiny little eggs. And that's, you know, you're losing from the beginning if you're doing that. So in terms of trying to get that brown staining off the wall, you need to get your calving house right. I would recommend using a foaming agent, and this is an alkylating agent. You can see it there in the picture. You pop your alkylating agent into your water source for your power hose, whether this is a barrel or something, and you run it through the power hose. The foaming agent comes out, and you cover all your every surface inside it in the calf shed. It breaks up all of this. This is to be done now before calving starts. It breaks up and penetrates all of that organic material or shite, and you leave it on for 20 minutes and rinse it off, and takes it all away. And it is an excellent way to start out. Now, if you do have problems like with the likes of coccidia or crypto, I think the best thing to do is to power hose all your sheds, then follow in with your alkylating agent, or this is your foaming agent, and then follow on once your shed has dried out, using the likes of a disinfectant agent that's effective against those excreted endoparasites such as crypto and coccidia. Now, those things are not cure-alls. They will work in a very, very limited, you know, when that shed is as clean as something coming out of a dishwasher, they're good to go then. But if you expect them to work where there is lots and lots of fecal matter, they will not work at all. So you need to get that shed absolutely really, really, really clean before you start out. So I know that you're all familiar with the 1, 2, 3 of calf management. I'm going to teach you the 4 T's of colostrum management. And this involves time, tools, testing, and temperature. So first, timing. If a new calf, if let's say a cow calves and it's 7 o'clock in the evening, and she may not be milked until 6 o'clock the next morning, and that's 11 hours later. And we know, and Catherine has said this already, that if you want the highest quality colostrum, milking the cow within 2 hours of calving is your kind of gold standard, because beyond 6 hours, there's a significant reduction in the level of antibodies. And some of the research has shown that antibody levels can drop by 17% even 6 hours after calving. So if you want to have high quality colostrum, you need to be milking those cows within that first couple of hours after they've calved. The next thing is our tool, which is what are we going to use to harvest milk from the cow for that first calving, because this is where the colostrum is going to come in contact with. And we have buckets and we have buckets. So you have to think of what are we putting our colostrum into? And sometimes it's the one on the right. And this, this isn't, you really need to question what you're using. You might be harvesting the milk or milking that cow in the right time, but if you're putting it into the bucket on the right, then you've got high levels of bacteria, which are going to compete in the gut with your immunoglobulins, and you don't want that to happen, obviously, because you want the in the gut, you want all those antibodies to be crossing the gut successfully to create a really good immune system for those calves. So a little bit of washing up, or investing in washing up liquid and Milton. These are your friends, and keep those buckets clean. So the next T is testing, and again, Catherine's mentioned this already, but for us, when we changed over to colostrum quality testing using the refractometer, like it was really eye-opening, because so these things are cows could be running milk in the cubicles or in the calving box before calving, and you wouldn't know about it. And every drop of milk that she's running, you're losing very, very valuable colostrum. And by the time this cow gets to the parlour for her first milking, antibody levels could be well below the desired 22%, despite how creamy or yellow that the milk looks. So test everything with the refractometer. It only takes a couple of seconds. It's cheap. They're about 30 or 40 euro, and you can get one on eBay. They have no batteries, so it's very, very easy to use. You put a drop of milk on the little glass lid there, and you close it up and you look into the eyepiece, and that's what you're looking at on the right hand side. And that's exactly what you want to see, that cutoff level of 22%. So when it goes below 22%, we don't use it on the farm. We just, it's not suitable. It's not going to be suitable for colostrum feed for calves. So we have started to build a bank of really high quality colostrum in terms of storage. So if you get, let's say, the cow and she gives 10 or 12 litres of excellent quality, maybe it could be 27%. I started put this into 3-litre milk containers. Michelle made a great suggestion about one of those strong Ziploc bags that will hold 3 litres, and where I'm putting it into a chest freezer. And building this bank of high quality colostrum is very useful, because that question came up already about what do I do if I haven't colostrum? Well, if you have a bank of it, and even, you know, it'll store in the freezer for a long time in a chest freezer. You can just defrost it and you have it there, and you're never caught short then. And you can just tap into that at any stage. So the last T is temperature. Again, bacteria love colostrum, and it's a perfect growth media for them, because it's nutritious, it's warm when it comes out of the cow, and they adore it, so they thrive. So because we don't want all of our colostrum immediately, we have to go to the trouble of storing it somewhere or other. And when you go to the trouble of getting good quality colostrum from cows at the right time, when you are going to the trouble of putting it into clean buckets and washing your buckets, and when you go to the trouble of testing it, it makes a whole lot of sense now to sort of store it correctly and store it in the right way, because this is our white gold. You shouldn't leave it hanging around the dairy, letting bacteria have basically a pool party on the surface of it. So again, as we said already, we know what bacteria do. They affect the absorption of your antibodies or immunoglobulins in the gut. So what I do in January is that I hoard these 3-litre milk containers, or again, I think I might go for the, as Michelle said, those strong Ziploc 3-litre bags. And I fill the 3-litre milk containers with Milton, and I leave them in the milking parlour. So they're fresh and ready to go. Any fresh colostrum that comes in, the Milton is tossed out and the colostrum goes in, and it goes into the fridge. So the fridge isn't a big expense. You can find a decent one on Dundee, and fresh colostrum can be stored for 48 hours in the fridge. And that's what we do. And after we mark the date that it goes into the fridge, and after 48 hours, we toss it out. So this is what we have, and in a chest freezer as well. We have a couple of those stored for when you need it during the calving season. So these are 4 T's of colostrum management. Again, time, your tool, your testing, and your temperature. Really, really, really important, because I've figured out over the years that when you focus on these 4 elements, you are ending up with better quality colostrum, but also your calf's immunity is that bit better. And how have we seen that? Because when, let's say, there was a little bit of scar at the end of the season, calves are staying on their feet. They're way less affected by it. They are far, far healthier. So this to me is an absolute non-negotiable. So again, this slide is for Linnaire's benefit. What is the investment? And when we look at this, again, we have €40, we'll say, for a refractometer on eBay. We have €200 for a small little fridge, €30 for a second speedy feeder, so that you can use that to feed sick calves and don't have that crossover. So as a capital investment, that's €270, and that can be written off over a number of years. And then when it comes to your consumables on an annual basis, a fairy liquid and a bit of Milton, about 13 quid. And then when it comes to the likes of the foaming agent in combination with, let's say, if you use it with one of these specific detergents that are targeting the likes of crypto and coccidia, then that's about €95 for those type of detergents. So then that's about €110 per year in consumables. Now, that is a very, very small price to pay if you consider the absolute heartache of a scour outbreak. That is a very, very, very small, like that wouldn't barely cover a vet call out, would it, Michelle? And so look, the investment is very small, but the rewards of that are absolutely massive. So again, just 2 last things to finish up, and we can go to, I'm sure there's plenty of questions. Make the jobs easy. This is what we put our heads together to make. This is a custom-made bucket washing station, or a blue barrel on top of a wheelbarrow frame, and it's the perfect height. it turns a time-consuming, back-breaking job into something that's easy and quick. And you know, I marvel at it every year when it comes out in comparison to what I used to do before it was there. So simple things like that are you know, it just helps you to do a job really, really well. And then finally, the AHI recipe. This is gold dust. You should write it down now. It's been mentioned a couple of times already. I have a couple of bags of these pre-made before the calving season, and anything that misses a feed, they get 2 liters of this, and it's excellent. You know, I wouldn't even dream of buying any other product. You can make this in the kitchen for buttons, and it works really, really well. So thank you, and best of luck to everybody in their respective calving seasons. And there we go.
Thanks, Jill. That was very practical and spot on time. I don't know if we have any other questions, or have we overloaded everyone's brains? I hope, and I think I learned loads myself. I hope you've all learned some from it. As we said, it's recorded, so you will have access to the recording after. I know someone was looking for your hygiene slide, Catherine. I don't know. We probably don't have time to put it up now, but if you have it there, we could just put it up. But
Grand, you get it on Teagasc or AHTB either, or I can send it on to you if you have a WhatsApp. You can circulate it either.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks. Has anyone any other questions? I think between all of us, we kind of focused on key messages, which you probably all have heard before, but I still think it's a good refresher. It's been probably a year since most of you have had calves. It was great. I'm very thankful to both our speakers and to all the committee for helping get it together. I suppose I don't think there are any other questions, so we can say thanks and hope you found it useful, and we'll see you all the next time. And don't forget to go to the AHI calf events. They're on all around the country. You can see the lineup on multiple media platforms, and I think it will really add to this, and you'll get to hear Catherine speak at some of them, and I'll be at some of them. So just brilliant. Thanks a million, girls. See you soon. Bye bye.
Cheers.
Bye.